There once was a poor country man whose only inheritance to his 3 sons was his farm, his donkey, and his cat. The eldest son inherited the farm, the second eldest the donkey, and the youngest son inherited the cat. "What on earth will I do with a cat? I can barely feed myself," said the youngest son. "Let alone how can I offer this pet anything? I have no money and am so poor." "Don't worry," said the cat. "If you can get me a sack and a pair of boots, you will see I am the most valuable thing your father ever owned." The son brought the cat what he asked for, as he knew he had nothing to lose. The cat put on the boots and took the sack to catch a plump rabbit. The cat wore the boots on his journey. He would be called Puss in Boots. He caught a plump rabbit and brought it to the king. Puss in Boots told the king the plump rabbit was a gift from his master, the Duke of Carabas. For several weeks, Puss in Boots brought the king many gifts from his master. The king was very curious about Puss in Boots and his master, the Duke of Carabas. But the king knew that the Duke was friendly and had the most well-behaved cat he had ever met. The king did not know that Puss in Boots had made up the name Duke of Carabas for his poor master. One day, the king and his daughter were riding in their carriage by the river. Puss in Boots told his master to take off his pants and shirt and jump in the river. His master agreed to do so. Then Puss in Boots yelled out, "Help! Help! The Duke of Carabas is drowning!" as the king's coach passed by him. The king ordered his driver to stop, and he told his guards to rush over and save the Duke of Carabas. The king saw Puss in Boots yelling and knew he must help him, as he had been so generous to the king. Puss told the king the Duke's clothes had been stolen. So the king offered the Duke a fine suit of his own clothes to put on. The Duke of Carabas got in the carriage for a ride. The king's daughter quietly told the Duke he looked very handsome. The Duke looked at her and told her she was very beautiful. Along the way, Puss had asked all the farmers and workers on the road, "If the king drives by, you must tell him the owner of all these lands is the Duke of Carabas, or the ogre who lives in the castle will eat you." All the farmers and workers answered when asked that the Duke of Carabas was their landowner when the king asked them. Puss in Boots ran ahead to the ogre's castle and asked the ogre about the trick he could do by changing into a small mouse from a big ogre. Puss in Boots told the ogre no one believed he could do a trick like that. The ogre said, "Watch me," as he turned into a small little mouse. Puss in Boots grabbed the mouse and ate it up, and that was the end of the big bad ogre. Just then, the king's carriage arrived at the castle gate. Puss in Boots ran to meet the carriage and said, "Welcome to the castle of the Duke of Carabas." His master could not believe what was happening. On the long ride in the carriage, he had fallen in love with the king's daughter. And Puss in Boots had planned everything to work out perfectly. The Duke asked the king if he could marry his daughter. And the king said, "Yes, of course." The Duke of Carabas and the princess were married and lived happily ever after in their castle. Puss in Boots was named a great lord and never had to hunt for mice ever again. Puss in Boots proved he was the best inheritance, as he had promised his master. Once upon a time, there was a mother pig who told her 3 little pigs it was time for them to build their own home and move out. She told them to build their homes to be safe from the big bad wolf. The first little pig bought some straw and built his house. Soon enough, a wolf came along and knocked on his door. The wolf asked, little piggy, let me come in." "Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin," answered the little pig. "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down." And the wolf blew down the little piggy's straw house. The second little pig built a house made of sticks. Along came the wolf, who said, little piggy, let me come in." "Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin," said the little pig. "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down," said the wolf. The wolf blew down the stick house. The third little piggy made a house of bricks. He built a very strong house. Soon enough, along came the wolf. He knocked on the pig's door and said, little piggy, let me come in." "Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin," said the pig. "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down," said the wolf. So the wolf huffed and he puffed, but he could not blow down the strong brick house. The wolf sat down and wondered how he could get that nice little pig outside the brick house. Then he had an idea. "Little pig," he called, "come with me to the farmer's turnip field. It is quite full of nice turnips. I will come for you at 6 o'clock tomorrow." "Okay," said the little pig. But the clever little pig got up at 5 o'clock and went to the turnip field and gathered all the turnips he could carry. He was back home at 6 when the wolf arrived. The wolf was very angry when he realized he had been tricked, but he did not show it. He had another plan. He thought of another idea to get the pig out of his house. The wolf invited the pig to the fair and said, "We can meet and go together at 3 o'clock sharp." The pig squealed, "Oh, I love fairs. I would love to go." The little pig slipped out early to the fair and had a wonderful time, playing games and eating cotton candy. He even bought a nice new barrel to collect his rainwater. On the way home from the fair, he saw the wolf coming up to meet him. The little pig climbed into his new barrel to hide. The barrel began to roll and rolled right past the wolf. The barrel scared the wolf, and he ran all the way home. After a while, the wolf went to tell the pig about the strange barrel that was rolling right towards him. The little pig laughed and said, "It was only a barrel," the little pig told him. "I was inside the barrel." The big bad wolf did not like to be laughed at, and he was tired of the little pig's tricks. He was also very hungry. He wanted to eat the little pig. "Little pig, I am tired of your tricks. The time has come to eat you up." It had been so easy to huff and puff and blow down the straw and stick houses, but he had to figure out what to do to get into this little pig's brick house. The big bad wolf looked up, and saw the chimney for the fireplace. And then he jumped up on the roof and shouted down, little piggy, down the chimney I will come to get you and eat you up." The little piggy put a huge pot of boiling water over the fire just in time. The big bad wolf jumped into the chimney and fell all the way down, right into the pot of hot water. And that was the end of the big bad wolf. Every afternoon after school, the children loved to play in a huge garden that surrounded a deserted castle. They loved to play there. One day while playing, a great voice yelled out, "What are you doing in my garden?" It seems the giant had returned back to his castle, and he did not want the children to play there. He shouted at them and told them to leave and never come back. They all ran away as fast as they could. The giant then built a huge spiked fence around his garden, so none of the children could ever get in. The giant put a large gate in the fence with a sign that said, "Keep out," in big black letters. The children would pass by and look sadly at their favorite place to play. They really missed playing in the beautiful garden. Soon fall and winter came and covered everything in snow and frost. The giant looked out his castle window at his snow-covered garden and wished for spring to come. Spring did come, everywhere except in the giant's garden. The snow and frost were thrilled to have a place to stay forever. One morning, the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard a bird singing. He leapt from his bed to look out the window. His whole garden was in spring bloom. The snow and frost were finally gone. Then he noticed all the children playing in his garden. You see, they had snuck into the garden through a hole in the wall, and spring had followed them in. One little boy was crying because he could not climb the trees like all the other children. He was just too small to reach. The giant helped the small boy to the top of the tree. The little boy gave the giant a hug and a kiss and said thank you. The giant thought it was time to let the children play in his garden, so he knocked down the big wall. The children played every day in the giant's beautiful garden. When the giant realized he had not seen the little boy he had helped to the top of the tree, he asked the other children, "Where is your little friend?" "We do not know," said the children. The giant asked the children every day if they had seen their little friend. The children told the giant, "The only day we saw him was the day you knocked down the wall." The years passed and the giant grew old and weak, and he could no longer play with the children. One cold winter morning, he was looking out the window, and he noticed the most beautiful tree he had ever seen.
Wow!
The tree was covered with delicate white blossoms with silver fruit, and beneath the tree was the little boy who had gone missing for so long. "He's come back at last," said the giant joyfully. Forgetting how old and weak he was, the giant rushed down the castle stairs and hurried across the garden. But as he neared closer towards the little boy, he saw bruises and cuts and nail marks in his hands and feet. "Who has hurt you?" asked the giant. "As old and feeble as I am, I will kill the people who have done this to you." The small child smiled gently and said, "Hush, don't be angry, but come with me." "Who are you?" whispered the giant, falling to his knees. "A long time ago, "You let me play in your garden," the child replied. "Now, I want you to come and play in my garden. It is called Paradise." That afternoon, when the children came to play in the garden in the winter snow, they found their giant friend lying dead. The old giant looked so peaceful. He seemed to have a beautiful, peaceful, gentle smile on his quiet face. The giant was covered in small, beautiful white flower blossoms. The children thought he looked so happy and at rest. They said sweet prayers for him to be playing with children angels in a gorgeous paradise garden forever. The children always remembered the giant for his kind heart and generous spirit, and played in his garden forever. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived in a village by a forest. Whenever she went out, she wore a red hooded cape. Everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother baked some cakes, and she asked Little Red Riding Hood to take them to her grandmother, who lived in the forest. Little Red Riding Hood was very excited and happy to go visit her grandmother. Her mother packed up the cakes in a basket and reminded Little Red Riding Hood to not waste time and go straight to her grandmother's house and to not talk to strangers. Along the path to her grandmother's house, there were flowers, ponds, and woodland animals along the way. And Little Red Riding Hood took her time and enjoyed them all. Then, all of a sudden, a wolf was beside her, asking, "Well, Little Red Riding Hood, what are you doing here?" She told him she was on her way to visit her grandmother's house in the forest. The wolf wanted to gobble up Little Red Riding Hood, but he noticed a woodcutter coming along. So the wolf thought of a plan. "Well, where does your grandmother live?" the wolf asked. Little Red Riding Hood answered, "She lives over the bridge and past the lake," she told the wolf. "Let's play a game and race to your grandmother's house to see who can get there first," said the wolf. "Okay," said Little Red Riding Hood as she ran towards her grandmother's house as fast as she could. The wolf knew a secret path that was far quicker and ran towards her grandmother's house to beat Little Red Riding Hood in the race. The wolf knocked on the grandmother's door, and she asked, "Is that you, Little Red Riding Hood?" The wolf was able to disguise his voice very well, and he replied, "Yes, grandmother, it is me." "Oh, come in, my dear Little Red Riding Hood," said grandmother. To her surprise, the big bad wolf ran in and gobbled her up. The wolf then dressed up to disguise himself as the grandmother. He put on her nightcoat and nightcap and jumped in her bed. Very soon after, Little Red Riding Hood knocked on the door. The wolf disguised his voice again and asked, "Who is it?" "It's me," said Little Red Riding Hood. "Oh, do come in, dear," crackled the wolf. When Little Red Riding Hood saw her grandmother, she barely recognized her and thought her voice sounded strange. As Little Red Riding Hood got closer, she noticed her grandmother's ears were so big and asked, "Grandmother, what big ears you have." "All the better to hear you with, my dear," croaked the wolf. "But, grandmother, what big eyes you have." "All the better to see you with, my sweet girl," replied her grandmother, who was really the wolf. "But, grandmother, what big teeth you have," said Little Red Riding Hood. feeling very scared. "All the better to eat you with," roared the wolf as he leapt from the bed towards Little Red Riding Hood. She ran towards the door as fast as she could. And now she could fully see that it was not her grandmother, but the big bad wolf. As she was trying to escape, she yelled, "Help!" in her loudest voice. "Help!" Cutter, who was working in the forest, heard Little Red Riding Hood's cries for help and ran to help her. He caught the big bad wolf and shook him so hard that grandmother came out all in one piece. Little Red Riding Hood hugged her grandmother and apologized for talking to strangers and wasting time. Her grandmother said, "Don't worry, dear. You have learned some important lessons. Now why don't we enjoy those delicious cakes you brought me?" The woodcutter took the big bad wolf deep into the forest, so he could never bother Little Red Riding Hood or her family ever again. The end.